instructors this semester and going forward. And we do intend to keep these modules updated and add to them as we sort of see what your needs are and adapting to this emerging space. As we all know, this is kind of changing quickly. So it's important for us to be being attentive to what your feedback is and adapting to that. So we'll do that. So the purpose of the conversation today is to introduce these Canvas modules that were developed for instructors to incorporate into their courses. So this is really focused on an orientation for students. So the students are the audience here, not instructors per se, although it's probably useful information for instructors. Really focused on the appropriate use of generative AI. What's not in these assignments in these units is strategies for developing assignments with AI, for example. So there's other resources around the university for that. Again, these are really focused on students being the audience. Some of the topics that these units cover include history of generative AI and technology, the ethical use of generative AI, using AI in classes, and evaluating AI generated content. There are 4 modules, and these can be used individually or as a whole unit together, depending on what your needs are. So again, look through them. I will step through the contents of these, and Wendy and her team can jump in to kind of flesh that out a little bit as needed. But these can be used sort of as an orientation in the beginning of the semester. Obviously, we had our work cut out for us this semester getting this done in time for the semester. So we got this launched last week. It's a little tight in terms of getting the modules into Canvas courses. But instructors could also use this sort of preceding assignments where they think generative AI might be likely to be used. So writing assignments, for example. So there's still an opportunity to work this in the courses if you find the content valuable, or you can start using it to prep for the spring courses, however, whatever you see fit. I will also say, just as a kind of a general kind of statement about their use, because the instructors in this room, or those of you that are supporting instructors, you may not be at the point where you're actually, directly, explicitly incorporating AI into assignments. So I think this is useful if you've started to actually work AI as a technology into the instructions in your assignments. But also, again, where AI is applicable, again, writing assignments, coding assignments, other things where you expect students to be using this, it's still useful to sort of have students have this orientation so that when they start using the technology, which is really inevitable at this point, that they're doing so appropriately. As I said, a quick caveat, we did work really quickly over the summer to get these up. We really tried to focus on what the most critical information was that we thought students would need at this point, and tried to be concise about this so that it was something that students, would actually take the time to read. But one of the things, as an example of additional content that we'll be working on, is some discipline-specific modules. So there's, as our working group has been discussing, what should go into a literacy module or a literacy unit, kind of recognize that there's different considerations regarding coding or, rhetoric and composition, scholarly writing, other disciplines, other sort of types of uses of generative AI, and those are probably worth their own attention with specific modules that instructors could incorporate depending on where they're teaching. So we're going to be working on those, and we'd certainly, as we walk through this unit and kind of you see what we have available, I would really like to hear from you. Wendy would really like to hear from you about what you think is missing here, and what we could build out to better support your needs. And generally speaking, what feedback you have about the overall structure and style of the modules. I'm going to include in the chat at least for those that are coming in through Zoom, a Qualtrics survey to provide feedback on these modules. This is also linked within the modules. and is probably the ideal place for you to provide feedback. I mean, obviously today we want to have a bit of a discussion about what your ideas are for the future directions with the modules, but as you start incorporating them into your courses going forward, check out that survey. We'd really, really appreciate it if you would take the time to provide some detailed feedback for us, because it's going to improve, these and how they evolve in the future. I'm going to drop also Wendy and I's email addresses in here, so if you want to reach out to us directly. A little bit of background information before I jump into the actual context of the module. Many of you know, and Zach mentioned, our AI and academic integrity working group, which started around October of 2022, right before ChatGPT was released. This was a cross-university effort. So a lot of the work like this AI literacy module are a result of a lot of different perspectives across the university. And, we increasingly feel it's important to make sure that many different disciplines and perspectives are incorporated, because each of those contexts have different issues that need to be addressed. There's also other groups like this that have been popping up. So we're not the only group, obviously, that's developing resources in this space. There's quite a bit of interest, and I think that that's obviously a reflection on the serious impact that this technology has had on education. So I'm glad to see that this particular AI Horizons group is going to continue to happen, because this is a really great community of practice. One other thing I like to point out is when our group started back in October, we were really focused on academic integrity. We've really shifted our focus to strategies for supporting the appropriate use of AI. And by appropriate, we mean uses that are approved by the instructor, that are aligned with university academic integrity policy. And that also, in a lot of what's in these literacy modules, is that we're really encouraging the correct use of AI. So using AI in ways that are aligned with academic success, and not sort of in lazy ways that might lead students towards results that are problematic for their learning process. Wendy and I presented this topic way back in February to Faculty Senate. These literacy modules were one of the things that we had promised Senate that we would develop as a resource for the university. And so that's sort of, once we presented that, is when we started digging into developing these. We also launched the aiai.psu.edu website. And I'm going to share my screen real quick, because there we go. So hopefully you guys can see that. So this is the front page of the AI website. There's a couple of useful resources here. One is a link to the literacy modules, which we'll get to in a second. We also have standard syllabus statements. These syllabus statements were developed and reviewed by Faculty Senate as well. So you're in good shape if you're thinking about how to incorporate language about generative AI in your courses. Copy and pasting and adapting this sort of content is a good way to get started with that if you haven't done so already. Right on the front page right here, because we do feel at this point that the literacy units are the most important thing for instructors to be thinking about right now, and learning design folks. We have right in the sidebar here a link to the instructions on using the modules. These are in Canvas Commons, and that is, at this point, it's not an ideal platform. Some of you may have used Commons and kind of found it to be a little bit clunky to use. So we included really detailed instructions. Wendy and I and some folks on our team kind of went back and forth on how to kind of explain how to get these into your courses. It's not too terrible once you do it once, but effectively you need to go into Canvas, click on the Commons tab on the side, and do search for artificial intelligence literacy. As you can see, this little icon with the robot in front of the white blackboard is kind of at a glance how you know you're in the right place. And there's 4 different modules again that you can link into. So I do encourage you to go to that site to get the instructions, and check out the contents. So you can kind of click right into, move my window here because it's blocked. Okay. You can kind of click right into the content and see what's in the modules and everything that's included here. So please do that just to familiarize yourself, but I'll run through that real quick with you now. And I will start with technology and history of AI. I'm going to go really quickly through this because you can review this yourself. I just want to give you a kind of a taste for what's in here. And also because there's 4 different modules, it's kind of good to familiarize yourself with which ones you want to incorporate into your courses, because some of them might be applicable to you, some of them may not. We did start with technology in the history of AI. Our feeling is that understanding the history and actually the technology is a good primer, a good starting point for understanding what its limitations are, what its strengths are, and kind of gets you a good first step towards making wise decisions about using this in the classroom. I will say as a general sort of structure for these modules, and again, because they're designed to be used individually, if you would like, they all have this sort of common structure. One is instructions for using the unit. This is not to be published in Canvas, but it's for instructors that are incorporating this content. This is the first page that's directed towards students. And I think that what is really nice here is we're not making any assumptions about what an instructor is choosing to do or what position they've taken regarding AI. So there's a couple points here that in all cases across all of these modules are really important to point out. Ultimately, putting some agency on the part of students to make sure that they understand that their choices regarding the use of AI, that they are responsible for those choices. Those choices should align with academic integrity policies. All students have the right to opt out of assignments. This was really critical regarding the current course review, which I hope is releasing recommendations shortly. All instructors that do incorporate AI as part of their assignments, they need to offer accommodation to students who don't wish to use AI. That's an important part of what the current guidance is from General Counsel. And then privacy and sensitive data limitations, which all instructors should be aware of, and students should be aware of too, because we want to make sure that they're not entering anything inappropriate into these systems. Each unit also has objectives. This is a good place to start to just familiarize yourself with the content. At the end of each of these units, there's also a quiz, and they're not particularly hard quizzes, but they are a way to ensure that students actually read the content. So if this is important for you, you can decide whether or not to use the quizzes, but it is a good way to just kind of do a knowledge check, reinforce the concepts, and also just from an instructor standpoint, tracking whether students are reading this material, making sure that they're clicking off those quizzes, and they don't have to be for any sort of value within the grades in the course, but they're just useful knowledge checks. I think that I'll skip, just in the interest of time, maybe skip through this one really, really quickly. And next button, give me 1 second here. My next button disappeared. So we'll just look at it from this level. So again, this is really going back to the beginning of AI back in the 70s, and I know Wendy likes to point this out, that that AI is not a new concept. A lot of the theories behind what we're using today with generative AI go all the way back to the 1970s. And it's interesting to see that entire evolution all the way up to the rise of ChatGPT. I think depending on the types of assignments you have, understanding the fact that the current sort of generation of AI can be used for text as well as image generation, and students can often use those in concert depending on the nature of the assignments. And lots of other good information in this one. Next up is the use of AI in assignments. There's my next buttons back. again, reinforcing, as as an important starting point and an important question for students to consider is whether or not their instructor has explicitly allowed the use of AI. And it might be that instructor's position is that they do not permit its use. But this is just really reinforcing the students that they should look at their syllabus, look at any guidance that the instructor has provided about AI use. And so constantly reinforcing that with them is really important. There's some terminology that we like to point out throughout this module, AI assisted versus AI generated. And really what we're trying to get students to is putting a critical eye on the use of AI and not just sort of accepting AI generated content that comes out of their prompts. And so this idea of AI assisted content is really kind of repeated throughout a lot of this content, to really look at generative AI as a partner in the learning process, rather than a tool that provides fully ready content to incorporate into assignments. Again, privacy is really important, and this is something that, as we've worked with general counsel and purchasing on guidance about ChatGPT, there are some rules about what you can and can't put into these prompts. ChatGPT, OpenAI, for example, collects a lot of the information that's input, and that is a breach of various policies depending on what content they're putting in. So this is important to keep in mind. This I know that this group has talked quite a bit about, so I won't go into too much detail about it. But for students, this is really important because this is sort of many of you have talked about the idea of prompt engineering, but really trying to move beyond just sort of a really basic question and answer sort of dynamic with generative AI, but getting to more sophisticated ways of prompting the AI to generate results that are useful in different educational contexts. So certainly instruction prompting is what we're used to, but role prompting, getting ChatGPT, for example, to write in a particular style or from a particular perspective. Few shot prompting, which really gets into the more sophisticated prompt engineering, where over the course of several prompts or with more sophisticated prompts, you can get more interesting and more useful results. So those are all articulated in more detail in the ensuing pages. And I think that this is going to be particularly useful for students to start moving towards better results with these tools. I won't go over citing because folks from the library are going to be here to talk about this in more detail, but that information is included in this module with some examples, which is helpful. Evaluating AI-generated content, again, kind of in concert with prompt engineering. Once you have results, kind of understanding that some of those results might include hallucinations or other kind of issues. And so going through each of these things concisely, but drawing students' attention to what some of these specific issues are, so that as they evaluate that content, they don't fall into any pitfalls and don't end up including, factually incorrect information as responses in their assignments. And so there's lots of examples of this. Some of them are included here. The one that I think is I've noticed, particularly when you ask ChatGPT to cite its sources, that it makes up citations. So things like that can really be embarrassing for a student and straight up contrary to their learning process. So drawing students' attention to the fact that those sort of results can come out of the AI are really critical. I think that the modules take a pretty balanced approach to what the strengths of the content are. So there's a couple of things that we know that AI is very good at doing, such as summarization, brainstorming ideas for topic. That's an example that I particularly like, using AI as sort of a partner in thinking through concepts within a course. It's really useful in that regard. So this can spur a lot of ideas for students regarding, again, going beyond the question and answer sort of dynamic and getting to really thinking about AI in its full potential as a thinking partner. Was somebody jumping in there? Okay. As just sort of a general heuristic for evaluating content, this page is particularly useful. Just a basic sort of 8-step process for evaluating this content. And this is something that I think students familiarizing themselves with can kind of build this into their process when they're using AI, just to avoid some of these pitfalls that I mentioned. And lastly, ethical use of AI. This was really important for us for a number of reasons, beyond just academic integrity issues. Really making sure that students kind of develop a responsible position about their own AI use, whether or not they're doing so as part of a kind of a sanctioned use by their instructor, or they're just using it for their own process to develop their own ideas. A lot of these ethical concerns come into play here. And again, I won't get into a whole lot of detail unless you all have some questions about any part of this. But transparency, what the AI is telling you about where it's getting its information and what process it has for generating the responses that it has. That's important to understand. This is all trained on content that's on the internet, which means that there's a lot of bias and harmful content in there that's baked into these models. They try to avoid these, but it still pops up, and students should be aware of that bias, and trying to have a critical eye on attending to that. Plagiarism and copyright is a sort of emerging issue that I know that content creators are really thinking a lot about regarding whether or not what OpenAI, for example, has done in training their models is completely legal. And so students should be aware that just sort of copying and pasting content out of ChatGPT could violate copyright law. It could be considered plagiarism, and it's just another thing that they should be paying attention to as they're incorporating that content into their assignments. Equity and fairness, data privacy. Again, 8095 and the university's data privacy rules come into play here, and it's important not only for instructors as they're developing assignments using AI, but also for students to understand what their role is in protecting their own privacy as they use these systems. And this is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and many of you all who teach or provide learning design support for instructors, is the impact on learning and critical thinking. Basically, the overuse of AI or the over-reliance on AI, and the way that might impact the students' learning, or in a really negative way. And I think that as a student who's really committed to their education, but is feeling the motivation to use AI, that this comes at sort of an intellectual a cost. It can enhance our idea formation, but it can also become a crutch. And students, I think, need to understand that. And I think this kind of information will resonate with students. So that is the gist of the modules. And again, there's the kind folks who authored a lot of this are here. If you have specific questions about any part of this, I do want to again draw your attention to the survey that we included, which will help us kind of understand what you found valuable, what you find is missing, and we will directly incorporate that feedback into future iterations of this. Again, they're in Commons, so as we update this and push this back out into Commons, you will all benefit from those changes that are based upon your feedback. So I do really encourage you, as you review these, to complete that feedback. And with that, I will stop sharing, and Wendy, you're welcome to jump in. And if there's anything there that I missed, I think that was a pretty fast run through of what is ultimately a lot of really great content.
I think you did a good job covering everything. Anthony, anything?
Nope, I agree.
Good. So maybe with the last few minutes that I have, is there anything really critical that's missing that we could really focus our energy on in the fall? Or also, are there any, for those of you who are within colleges, that might see more applicability if we included some discipline specific examples? I'd be curious to hear any of your thoughts about either of those things. I'd be also happy to hear that you feel like we hit the nail on the head and covered all the critical things.
Chris, it looks like we have a question in chat. Anne asked, can you share the ways you are working to bring faculty awareness to these? I assume these mean the AI literacy modules.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's always a challenge at Penn State. We did have, I believe, Wendy, I don't know if you saw it or not, if it went out, but we included a reference to these in the all university faculty news digest.
Yeah, it came out Friday. It wasn't
It did.
Friday.
Okay, good. I didn't see that came out, but we included a blurb about this. So there should be good general awareness. As always, we rely on communities like this to share this around. And, you know, the aiai.psu.edu site is easy to remember. So if you want to just go there and share that link around with folks, that like I said, it's right on the front page of that site. I think we're also going to do a news story at some point soon about this. We were just struggling to get the content already and published last week. So now we'll do throughout the fall, we'll do lots of promotion. But if you have specific channels that you feel would reach the most faculty, Wendy and I would love to hear that.
Hi, I was wondering, I've never imported anything from Commons. I'm always sort of moving over my own content and then playing around with it. So we have the same flexibility with this content, right? We can take the content, dump it into our course, and then tweak things accordingly.
Yeah, once you import it into your course, it's yours and you can modify it as you see fit. So this is really a starting point. And one thing I would say, if you do end up modifying it, let us know, because it will help us to adapt that to better suit your needs. So if you wanted to share anything back with us after you made changes, I'd love to hear that. But yeah, Commons is awkward. Look at the instructions. You basically have to go into Commons, find those materials, and then favorite them, and then go back into your course, and then go to import content and find that from Commons favorites. It's a roundabout way. I don't know why they make it that difficult. But once you get through it once, it's not that hard. Lots of comments here. Let me just look through chat. Okay, thank you, Jesse, for putting the link to the survey. Yeah.
Hey, Chris, I can comment. This is Janet Duck
Sure.
from the Online MBA. And Chris, thanks so much for all of your work and help. And Wendy, this is fabulous. Just to add insight in terms of how we're sharing this with our faculty. So we have about 60 plus faculty in the Online MBA. We're a partnership of 4 different college and campuses. So the way that we decided to do it is Dana Friedman, who's here, who's our kind of our local expert in this area, has developed a team space that not only includes the literacy model, but is kind of a central one-stop shop for AI. And if I'm saying this acting like I know what we're doing, we don't, but we're trying. So what we're trying to do, to be honest with you, is to centralize resources that are available and anything that we can educate our faculty on. And when I say faculty, we have teaching support specialists. We also have instructional designers, as well as faculty. So the way that we're approaching this is development of this team space, which has various channels in it: internal resources, external resources, policies such as this, a community of practice, well, what what this would be, but a best practices space. So what we're going to do is try to filter a bit, because I think what our faculty are feeling at this point is overwhelmingness. So we're going to start at the basic and say, here's a one-stop shop space that Dana will manage and import information that has been kind of socialized for our group based on our standards and the way that our strategy is for AI. And within that, we have this, thank you, this is so great, this literacy model. So in short, we're trying to centralize communication, focus it on what is relevant, more broad, but also relevant to our specific program, and keep focusing on the fact that we're learning. And this space is a space, safe space for us to just share information. So best practices sessions going forward is just a way that we're going to pull this information and other information to just share with our group. So that's, and I just sent a message to Chris asking if he could do like a 10-minute blurb on the literacy model specifically at our upcoming meeting. So that's a little bit about how we are educating our instructional teams on this.
Thanks. That's super useful. And you guys have been very, very thoughtful about how you prepare your faculty and your students. So that's just nice to hear. And I will say this is the first full semester where we've had to really deal with, with the advent of this technology. And I think we'll learn a lot. So hearing Janet about how that goes for you guys over the course of fall and incorporating that feedback into the spring will be really critical. So thank you.
Yeah, happy to share.
I don't know if this is helpful at all, but something I've done, and I started experimenting with it this summer because I taught both summer 1 and summer 2 sessions, but I have already a plagiarism quiz that the students have to get 100% on in order to unlock their midterm and their final. And so I added some AI writing, AI assisted writing questions to that. And it's a quiz in which I present a scenario and then say, is this acceptable? And then of course they get feedback on why it is or isn't. And I noticed that with the pre-quiz and also kind of changing my my prompts to directly address AI usage, that I was getting much better, a lot less suspicious looking papers for the midterm and final this past semester.
Yeah, I think just directly having that conversation, at the beginning of the semester is really critical. Just making sure that they understand that you are aware that this is a thing, and that you have expectations regarding their use of that technology. Just engage with your students on this. We're all learning, like Janet said, we're all learning, and not pretending that it doesn't exist and it'll go away by itself. It's not.
Yeah. Now for my colleagues, I would say I'm probably at the leading edge of my department, but what I'm doing is presenting at faculty meetings and at retreats, sort of shortened versions that give them a couple of quick answers, and then, places where they can go down the rabbit hole if they so choose.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's a question, are there working groups within colleges to address the impact of AI? Maybe one day you could speak to this, but they're, as Janet said, they're, within the OMBA, she is. I know, Wendy, you've been doing a lot of work within liberal arts. Maybe you can talk about what you guys are doing in terms of like kind of discipline specific communities.
Yeah, I think because there's different concerns depending on the college, that it works out well to have working groups or workshops within the different colleges. We are offering workshops within liberal arts, and I know other colleges, SMIL, are offering the same, just to address the specific concerns. So anybody in the liberal arts, reach out to the Filippelli Institute and we can assist you. Other folks, your learning design units, reach out to the contact person there. I believe to teaching groups there, we also have teaching groups. I saw Josh Weed in the audience there. I don't know if you're still there, but we have teaching groups as well that are addressing this.
Yeah, and Wendy and I are familiar with a lot of those. So if you want to reach out to us directly, we can kind of route you to the right places if you would find that helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris and Wendy, for presenting and sharing your AI literacy module and resources. So if anybody has any more questions, feel free to drop them in chat for Chris or Wendy, or you can reach out to them directly. But now we're gonna switch over to Anne and Dawn from the library, and they're gonna talk about citing generative AI. Anne and Dawn, you can take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us here today. We do have some slides to share with you. Great. Awesome. I'm Dawn Amsberry, instruction librarian. With me today is my colleague, Ann Behler, information literacy librarian and instruction coordinator with the libraries. So I have some quick information about citation for you. Chris mentioned that in the modules, there's a section on citing for students to work through. So this is some quick information about citing in general. The big citation style guides, APA, MLA, and Chicago have issued specific guidelines. The other styles have not issued anything specific yet, but hopefully that will be coming. I would always tell students to check with their instructors for guidance on citing and to make sure they understand what, the expectations for their specific course about citing. Anne, can you go to the next slide? So APA says to describe how you use the tool. They say the methods section, but we know that undergraduate papers don't necessarily have a methods section, but they do say to talk about how you use the tool at some point in the paper. And they say to include in-text citation and something in the reference list. And we can make these slides available so you can have all these links. And if you go to the next slide, there's an example. So this is an example from APA. They mention ChatGPT in the text. And then there's an in-text citation, and then there's also a reference where OpenAI is the author. So the different citation styles have different views on who the author is. And, you can get very philosophical about these things as to what is an author and who is the author. So they say that AI is the author, ChatGPT, the name of the tool is the title, according to their style, and then the year is the year of the version that you're using. So MLA is a little bit different. They say as well to cite the tool and to talk about its functional use at some point, describe how you used it. And the next slide has an example. So MLA says to include the prompt. So in MLA style, if there's no author, then the title is what's used as the in-text citation and the beginning of the works cited entry. So MLA does not consider AI to be the author. So they say to include a shortened version of the prompt as in-text citation, and then the complete prompt in the works cited entry, the name of the tool, OpenAI, and the date. And one last example I have here is Chicago. Yep. So they say to credit the tool, but Chicago is very clear that ChatGPT and these tools are not authors. So they say to put in a note and not to include something in a reference list. So if you go to the next slide, Anne, there's a example of a note. And this is what Chicago recommends for just including a note with the name of the tool, the creator and the date. So that is just a very quick overview. We have two guides that have examples, the APA and the MLA guide. One of our colleagues, Denise Wetzel in the libraries, has created a guide with a lot of great information about these tools. And there's some more information about citing on that guide as well. And also the AI modules that Chris talked about have a whole section for students to work through on citing. So I'm going to turn it over to Anne.
Ready? Sorry, getting that last link in the chat there. I think I got most of the links that Dawn was talking about. So we really, like Chris, we invite your feedback and input on these guides. I'm going to talk about these issues from a little bit of a different perspective. This is not, as you all probably know, a conversation or issue that's happening just around students in the classroom. There are also issues around scholarship. And so I'm going to talk a little bit from my perspective as a journal editor and librarian. So you get to see both hats in action today. One of the first things, though, that I did want to share with you all is that copyright has been mentioned a few times in the presentation already. And I think that's one of the areas where people have probably the most questions. So I'm going to try to throw this link into chat for you all. This is from a resource from the Copyright Alliance and in collaboration with the American Library Association. And in sum, where they land on this is that AI generated content, so we have the generated content, we also have the inputs, right? And so both areas are areas for question around what constitutes copyright infringement, plagiarism, and so forth. So when you're talking about the inputs, the agreement is that generally it is considered fair use. And I think about in the analogy to written work and maybe parody, or taking something, where you take something or more than one something and you create something new that might resemble that something, but it is not that same thing. So it is interpretation of it. It is, some other form that requires the intermediary of probably yourself and the AI to generate the new content. So it is generally considered to be fair use in terms of what you're inputting into the AI generator. Then is the question of the work that comes out the other end. And if the AI produced work is substantially similar to what was ingested by the AI, then the creator can be up, in hot water in terms of copyright. However, if it's not like, just a different color and the same image or something like that, or a few words here and there changed, then it's considered a new work. AI generated work may be copyrightable as well by the person who has produced it, if you, the human, sufficiently controlled the AI so that it's considered a work of human authorship. This is where it all gets pretty squishy. Do I have an answer? How much has to be human authorship? How much effort from the machine, the human, the what? I do not have an answer. But these are the general kind of guidelines and things to be thinking about when you're thinking about both in terms of student use of these and what constitutes plagiarism, as well as your own playing around with these and teaching students how to use these tools and creating your own works of art and writing that may have the assistance of AI. So conversations that I'm seeing in scholarship through the editorial board that I'm sitting on, and you all may be seeing these things as well, floating around different listservs and groups that you interact with. Again, these are at the moment questions. And as Dawn stated too, the different schools of citation and citation rules all have different stances on authorship. So that is one question that we get a lot and are dealing with. Is it permissible to include AI generated content in the first place? How to cite that content? Can AI be listed as an author? Is that okay? Is it permissible to use AI for the writing process? If so, which portion, and how do you document that? Does a scholarly outlet require authors to document use of AI through the writing process? Or to what extent? On the flip side of things, I do a lot of copy editing. Is it ethical, okay, permissible for AI to help me with that? Could AI be used for manuscript review? These are things that I'm unaware of happening at the moment, but they certainly could happen in the near future. So these are questions that are coming up all over the place. So I thought it would be maybe helpful and interesting to share a sampling of journal policies and guidelines, because these are sort of things that end up informing how we think and teach about these issues. And I tried to get a sampling of different disciplines represented here, not just library science, because I feel like librarians, this is something that we have our radar, our antennas up about this already. But it is something that's coming into play in a lot of fields. And obviously you can go to these links later at your leisure. But here's one that I just kind of thought, it's the last one listed there, actually, the Committee on Publication Ethics, because it's more of an umbrella, and it mentions a few of the others, including JAMA and the World Association of Medical Editors. And it lets you know kind of where things are standing right now, which is, generally speaking, scholarly journals, from what I've seen, are not allowing AI to be listed as authors. No, they are not considered authors, cannot be considered authors. And that a lot of ethical consideration is left up to the author of a journal submission, but that authors are asked to cite AI when it's used in the writing process, and be transparent about that. Have I seen the results of this process yet? Personally, no. I'd love to hear if anyone else has experienced this. I'm sure I'm not the only person involved in scholarly publishing in this conversation. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of put this out there for you all to consider as well. And we want to open it up for questions, whether it's about a continuation of what Chris was presenting in terms of resources, or questions that you have for Dawn and I about information and information use. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing just so we can see each other's faces.
Awesome. I'm sorry I have a comment. First of all, this is so helpful. So helpful. Would you all be willing at one of our best practices session to come and give an overview like you just did to our faculty group or instructional team group?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. So consider yourself, we'll send you the date and you can bill us later. Okay.
Sounds great. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you, Anne and Dawn. So are there any questions for either presenter from today regarding AI literacy, the Canvas modules, or citing generative AI? Or are there just any questions in general for the start of the semester? How to AI?
I have a question. This one is on the citing, and maybe this is too specific since the sightings things are so new, but I believe it was the MLA citing that said you put the prompt into the site. But one of the things that we are kind of teaching people when they use things like ChatGPT is you're having this whole conversation, right? This whole back and forth. So what would be considered the prompt there? Because it might be 20 questions later that we finally have the outcome, right? But it's a tough question.
I'm not sure I have the answers to that. As far as what the guidance that MLA has issued, I don't think they addressed that particular question. It could be the final prompt that you put in would be the prompt that you use. But again, I think this is one of these many questions that are out there as a question. Without an answer, a very specific answer yet.
Is anyone aware of any actual issues or cases that have sprung up yet where this comes into play and this is questioned? And
Not yet. I'm sure that it's on the horizon. I've just been involved in informal conversations with faculty. One that sticks out to me actually that I think was just a light bulb in terms of, a lot of our talk about this is how we discuss this around like class assignments specifically. But the instructor I was talking with was sharing with me that they had students who were using GPT in class to help them through discussion. And the way they figured that out was that the student would say something that was sort of related to the topic at hand, and it wasn't like totally out of left field, but it also wasn't quite in the heart of the classroom discussion. And so I thought that was an interesting moment for me, is that it really is, I think there are many uses for this that we're not even imagining right
agree.
now.
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
And I guess that also is a moment to put in a plug for library instruction, which is really the heart of what Dawn and I do on the day-to-day as well, because there's a lot of overlap here too. But in terms of working with your students, one of the things that we can help instructors do is to employ lessons, learning objects, things like that are focused around evaluating information broadly. And then there's, you compare that with the AI modules and what they do about AI specifically. So I just wanted to put out there that we are resources for you all as well. And there are some of us at all of the campuses and for World. So we are very happy to work with you and your faculty and your students in this space, because it's just becoming more complicated and we know it.
Thanks.
Yes, I love, I want to add to what you just finished with there, and that this space is very complicated. And just from following the chats and the recent conversation about the citations, one person thinks it should be the final prompt, one person thinks it should be the first prompt. And I think that just adds to how fluid generative AI is right now and how complicated and murky all of this is. But that is why we have spaces and groups like this, right? To have these conversations and to ask these questions and to connect with each other. But that is all we have for today. We wanted to cap this at an hour for today with the start of the semester. So with any other questions you do have, you can throw them in the Teams channel in the AI in the classroom. This meeting is recorded, so once we have it, we will post that in the space as well. And right now, there's no more scheduled AI Horizons, but as I mentioned previously, we will relaunch these, so keep an eye out in the team space for when these will start back up. We're thinking about sometime in September, so either the first or second week in September. So thank you, everybody, and have a great first week of the semester.
Awkward hybrid Zoom in person quandary.